All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our opening reception for this exhibition, Sacred Biodiversity, Icons of Threatened and Endangered Species. It's really wonderful to see a full room here today. In addition to everybody here, we have people joining us through live stream. So thank you all for being here. I'm really excited for this conversation today. I hope you've all had a chance to see the icons, to maybe contemplate the icons. And for those online, you can see images of them on Angela's website, although I have to say that it's not nearly as impactful in my experience to see them virtually. So what we're going to do now is to have an opportunity to hear from the artist, Angela Manno, and then to have a panel discussion, the result of which I hope is to help us enter more deeply into Angela's important work. I want to mention first that this exhibition is part of the Religion, Ecology, and Expressive Culture initiative through the ISM. The initiative, which just launched in January, seeks to support and disseminate work at the intersection of religion, ecology, and expressive culture. This spring, we've held several events focused particularly on the topic of extinction. We had a series of webinars in January and February that are now available on our website, and now we're thrilled to host this exhibition. If you're interested in learning more about the initiative, including about our request for proposals, there's information available on the initiatives page on the ISM website. So let me just give an overview of what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to begin by introducing Angela, and she'll speak for about 15 to 20 minutes. I'll then come back up and introduce our panelists, each of whom are going to speak for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then after that, we'll open it up for conversation between Angela, the panelists, and all of you. So let me first introduce our artist. Angela Manno is a graduate of Bard College, and she studied art at the San Francisco Art Institute, Parsons School of Design, and l'École des Arts in Lacoste, France. Particularly relevant to the current exhibition is the fact that she also trained with master iconographer Vladislav Andrejev in the ancient liturgical art of Byzantine Russian iconography. Angela's art has been featured in numerous solo and group exhibitions, including the National Museum of Women in the Arts, the Smithsonian Institution, the American Museum of Natural History, and other museums around the world. Her works reside in many private collections throughout the Americas, the Middle East, Europe, and Southern Asia, in distinguished public collections including NASA and the Smithsonian Institute's National Air and Space Museum. While Angela has always featured environmental themes in her art, she's focused on the creation of icons of endangered and threatened species since 2016, when she made her first, which is the honeybee, the second one here. Working in while also modifying the tradition of Orthodox iconography, Angela seeks to expand our spiritual vision beyond anthropocentrism, fostering what she calls a biocentric sensibility, through which we can undergo ecological conversion, which is a term she borrows from Pope Francis. And Angela is herself deeply committed to the ecological issues that she seeks to highlight in her work. She donates half the profits from the sale of her icons to the Center for Biological Diversity and other conservation organizations. And she's also, I learned yesterday, been involved in activism for years, fighting for environmental justice and ecological conservation. Angela's art is just the kind of work we're excited to highlight through this initiative. It's deeply engaged with the religious and the sacred. It's directed at pressing environmental issues, and it seeks not only to inform, but also to transform. So for all these reasons, we're thrilled to have Angela here with us, and please join me in welcoming her.
Can you all hear me? Okay, thank you, Ryan, for that beautiful introduction. I'm delighted to be here and to see so many people gathered. Closer? Okay. I'm delighted to be here and see so many people gathered that I know, I don't know, some students, faculty, friends, and I'm really happy to be able to present my work to you and describe a little bit of how I came to create this series. So I'll get right into it. So first I'll talk briefly about how and why I came to create this series. And then what I've never done before is show aspects of the process I use in creating my icons of threatened and endangered species. So over 40 years of my practice as a professional artist, I've explored many media, including pastel, batik, photography, oil, and encaustic. My subject matter was consistent in that it always focuses on the beauty and integrity of the natural world and humanity's place in it. In 1998, I became interested in the liturgical art forms and began practicing Byzantine Russian iconography, while simultaneously studying iconology, which is the study of the symbolism in the icon, with a master iconographer from Russia, as Ryan just mentioned. The images and the materials were gorgeous during this phase, and the practice was very healing in two ways. First, because having grown up in a form of exoteric Catholicism, where the mystical tradition was largely absent, the Eastern Orthodox tradition, from which the icons emerged, was highly mystical and appealed to my intuitive mind and my craving for inner meaning. Second, in this tradition, the images are an expression in symbolic form of the teachings of the saints, ascetics, and leaders of the church throughout the centuries. The images are meant to impress themselves upon you. So, as opposed to Western art, where the individual genius of the artist impresses him or herself on the canvas, I could rest in and be nourished by the images as they came to life on the icon board. About a year into the practice, however, I felt constrained by the anthropocentrism of the imagery, where nature was relegated to the backdrop of the human divine drama, and had a deep need to expand the canon of images to include the whole of the natural world in order to be true to what I know and feel about the sacredness of all life and to glorify creation in its fullness. So, that said, we're going to start with an image of one of my traditional icons. This is an image of one of my traditional icons, Archangel Michael of the Apocalypse. I chose this image because of what I believe to be its significance for the modern world and the ecological disaster we are finding ourselves in. Archangel Michael is the protector of the earth in traditional iconography and Orthodox belief. I think you can see that the tongue of the dragon is being pierced by Archangel Michael's spear. The tongue of the dragon represents, according to my teacher, the lies of civilization at the end of the world. The lie that humans are separate from and above the natural world is at the bottom of our environmental collapse. In the words of E.F. Schumacher, modern man talks of a battle with nature, forgetting that if he won the battle, he would find himself on the losing side. Our healing and salvation lies in our realization that we are one single sacred earth community. So let's see if this, okay. The following are some slides that demonstrate the process and symbolism of my traditional icons. As you'll see, the method, materials, and symbolism are inseparable. We'll start with one of my traditional icons and then switch to my icons of threatened and endangered species. This is the beginning of Our Lady of Tenderness. Each stage in the creating of an icon has a precise symbolic meaning. The stages of an icon begin with the icon board, which you can see is, in this case, is under the gesso, which symbolizes the tree of life. The board is covered with 13 layers of gesso made of marble dust and chalk. All materials in creating these icons are as close to their natural state in order to give glory to God. The act of applying the gesso puts you in a state of contemplation. The white gesso itself symbolizes pure consciousness. Then the image is carved or inscribed into the white gesso, which represents an idea in the mind of God. I like to think of this as what happened before the Big Bang. All forms were uncreated, in potentia. Here you see a layer of clay that is the substrate for the gold halo. The clay represents our physical dimension, and the gold, our divine nature. In this tradition, humanity is a marriage of matter and spirit, and is in the image and likeness of God. And as you can imagine, this is where I began to feel uncomfortable with reserving the imago Dei to humans only. So this is the next stage in creating an icon, and it's the application of color, which represents life. The medium is egg tempera, which is a mixture of powdered pigments with an emulsion of egg yolk, white distilled vinegar, and water. This particular stage of color, called rozkosh in Russian, is applied with coarse pigments that give a turbulent effect and represents chaos. In scientific terms, I like to think of this as a stage as the formation of the first primary particles after the Big Bang. The subsequent stages represent cosmos, or order, that complexifies into body, soul, and spirit as the image takes shape on the icon board. Here is a detail of Our Lady of Tenderness and the application of the third float, which in modern terms is known as a glaze. This stage represents spirit. And so now we're going to move on to my more contemporary expression of iconography. This piece is entitled The Earthly Paradise, Icon of the Third Millennium. As I mentioned earlier, after about a year into the practice, I was ready to break the mold and move into terra incognita to express my sense of the sacredness of the entire universe, and most urgently that of the earth. Here the earth is depicted not only in its physical dimension, but its spiritual dimension, which is symbolized by the halo and rays surrounding the atmosphere. In traditional iconography, this design represents the Holy Spirit. This added dimension represents the earth as a biospiritual entity, having reached its highest fulfillment and maximum level of complexity and consciousness. And after I created this icon, I discovered this quote from Thomas Aquinas, which fully expresses what I am trying to do with my series of icons of threatened and endangered species. And I'll read it. Because the divine could not image itself forth in any one being, it created the great diversity of things, so that what was lacking in one would be supplied by the others, and the whole universe together would participate in and manifest the divine more than any single being whatsoever. So here we are coming to the transition from traditional iconography to my contemporary icons of threatened and endangered species. On the left is the guardian angel, and on the right is an icon of the Mexican blue-capped hummingbird. You can see some of the common elements in both, such as the inner frame and the name of the subject in the upper left-hand corner. In my contemporary icons, I use the scientific name. And this is the beginning of my icon of the honeybee, which, as Ryan mentioned, was the first that I created in the series in 2016. You can see, okay, hold on a second. You can see the white gesso board, the design, which I've transferred onto the board, and some of the tools I use, including the etching tool, which I use to inscribe the design into the board. After inscribing the image, I apply liquid red bowl clay to which the gold leaf will be applied. After another step before applying the gold is burnishing the clay, which is what I'm doing here. And this is another fun, something fun for you. It's a video, so let's see if I can get it to. So the clay mixture contains some glue, so to make the glue receptive to the gold, you have to breathe on it, which is symbolic of God breathing life into Adam. Now, I don't know. Oh, okay. So now here you see all of the areas where I have laid down the gold. And next, here is that stage, the Rosicrucian stage that I mentioned earlier that represents chaos, like you saw in the beginning stages of Our Lady of Tenderness. This is a detail of the wings of the honeybee, still in process. And you'll note on the upper right-hand corner a detail of the Virgin's robe. As you can see, both the bee's wings and the robe are highly faceted, like a jewel. And as you can see, even the background gets a float. And here is the completed honeybee, having gone through many, many layers of color. And lastly, it's the final stage when the icon gets its oil sealant. I'm hoping I can get this to work. Oh, it's moving, okay, good. In Russian, the process of applying, or the oil sealant itself, is called olifa. It takes about 3 weeks to dry completely. Now I'll show you a sampling of images from the exhibition and some pieces that are not in the show, one from each genus. This is the loggerhead sea turtle. Sea turtles are an ancient species, haven't been around since the time of the dinosaurs, about 110 million years. This sea turtle is listed as critically endangered. The major threats to their existence are plastics, which they ingest, mistaking for food. Oil spills, they often mistake the pools of renegade oil for the sargassum seaweed that they need for their survival. Many areas where drilling occurs are critical sea turtle habitats. Other serious threats are accidental catching of turtles in commercial fishing gear and oil on beaches that pollute hatchling and nesting areas. People of the forests, the meaning of orangutan in the Malay language in Sumatra, are listed as critically endangered. This is the Sumatran orangutan. Oops, I don't know why that happened. Hold on. In the wild, extinction is likely in the next 10 years. Extinction in the wild, that is. Their recent history is heartbreaking. It is the story of losing their only home to bulldozing and burning to make ready for palm plantations and other agricultural plantations. Poaching, hunting, illegal logging inside protected areas, and unsustainable logging in concessions where orangutans live remain a major threat to their survival. This is the chambered nautilus. It's been around for about 500 million years, even before the dinosaurs, and now it is endangered. The main threats are overharvesting, habitat loss, and climate change. Populations in some areas, such as in the Philippines, are declining due to overfishing. One serious climate change-related issue is ocean acidification, which affects the nautilus's ability to build its calcium carbonate-based shell. This is the Andean marsupial frog. Because of their permeable skin, amphibians are particularly vulnerable to environmental disturbances, from chemical pollution to the thinning ozone layer and global climate change. Listed as endangered, this Andean marsupial frog's natural habitats are subtropical or tropical, moist mountain forests and arable land. Threats to this species are habitat alteration and loss, deforestation, logging, related activities, intensified agriculture, grazing, urbanization, pesticides, fertilizers and pollutants, disease, climate change, increased ultraviolet B rays, or increased sensitivity to them. This is the giant kelp, which grows in forests along 1/4 of the world's coastlines and cushions them against the effect of storm surges and sea level rise. It provides a nursery and refuge for many marine animals. Cleanses the water by absorbing excess nutrients and absorbs carbon dioxide, which helps to drive down ocean acidity and reduces increasingly warming ocean temperatures due to climate change, coastal development, pollution, fishing, and invasive predators. This is the monarch butterfly. The monarch migration pattern, spanning thousands of miles, is epic. It takes 4 or 5 generations of them to make the 3,000-mile flight from Mexico all the way to Canada. These butterflies, once a familiar sight, are plummeting towards extinction due to landscape-scale threats from pesticides, development, and global climate change. This is the emperor penguin. one of the 19 species of penguins, all of which are endangered. Because of the receding ice due to climate change, they are losing needed space to breed and raise chicks and to avoid predators. Their key food source, krill, is also declining because of melting ice, ocean acidification, and industrial fishing. This seahorse, Hippocampus hystrix, is one of the 46 species of seahorses, all of which are in decline, is classified as vulnerable species by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Their global decline is due to coastal development, marine pollution, destruction of seagrass and coral habitats, oil spills, bycatch, collection for the aquarium trade, global climate change, and ocean acidification. More than 20 million seahorses are estimated to be traded each year for the Chinese medicine. Lesser known causes are land-based deforestation, which leads to increased siltation in surrounding marine waters, therefore suffocating seagrass beds and killing coral reefs. If all the beasts were gone, man would die of a great loneliness of spirit. And this is attributed to Chief Seattle. And this is my series thus far, and it's continuing. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. I'll just close this. Yeah, go ahead and close it. Okay. Well, thank you to Angela. That was wonderful, and I'm sure many people are going to have questions and things they'd like to talk about. But before we get to the open conversation, I want to invite our panel up. So if you're on the panel, please come up now. You can take one of these 3 seats. And as you do so, I'll begin introductions of the panel. We have an incredibly distinguished panel today, and I have the impossible task of introducing them briefly, so I'm going to do my best to do that. Unfortunately, they're all Yale faculty, so I'm sure many of you know them. So first, Robert Nelson, all the way to the left. Robert Nelson has spent many years teaching medieval art and art history in the Yale Department of the History of Art. He's now Professor Emeritus in the History of Art at Yale. We're especially fortunate to have him as part of the panel due to his expertise in icons and iconography. In 2006 and 2007, he was the co-curator of Holy Image Hallowed Ground Icons from Sinai at the J. Paul Getty Museum. He's also the author of many books and articles on topics including not only iconography, but the history of the Cathedral at Constantinople, the history of the Greek lectionary, the social lives of the illuminated Greek manuscripts, and many other things. Next is Walter Jetz, to the right, or to my right anyway. He is professor of ecology and evolutionary biology and of forestry and environmental studies at Yale. He runs the Jetz Lab, which studies global biodiversity, ecology, and conservation, and is especially interested in, as the website says, assessing the fate of biodiversity and its functions under global change. He's also the scientific chair of the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation and the director of the Yale Center for Biodiversity and Global Change. One notable project of his lab, which is what originally caught Angela's attention and mine as well, is the Map of Life, which was recently featured in the New York Times. It's a platform that combines satellite imaging with ecological data to determine how species ranges are changing in a changing world. And I recommend you check it out online if you haven't seen it before. And finally, Mary Evelyn Tucker is a senior lecturer and research scholar with appointments at the School of the Environment, the Divinity School, and the Department of Religious Studies. After leading 10 conferences on world religions and ecology at Harvard in the 1990s, she and John Grimm founded the Forum on Religion and Ecology in 1998, which moved to Yale in 2006. She's the author or editor of many books, perhaps most famously Journey of the Universe with Brian Swimme. But I think the main thing to say about her work is that she and John together are really the creators of the field of religion and ecology, and so much of what we're doing here today and with this initiative has been built on the foundation of what they've done at Yale and beyond. So I'm so grateful to have this panel here. You each have a microphone on your seat, and you're welcome to speak from your seat using the microphone or come up here. I've been told to tell you if you use the microphone, please speak closely to it to make sure the people on our live stream can hear. So let's just go in the order that I introduced you. We'll start with Robert, then Walter, then Mary Evelyn.
Is it working? No. Hello? Hello? Yes. Okay. I'm going to stand up because that's how I teach or taught. And I'm going to respond to the paintings themselves as works of art and as icons. And to do so, I'm going to speak in front of the paintings. Now, the first thing to say about them is that they're small. They're rather smaller than what I imagined when I got the invitation and I saw them online. That means as an icon that these are personal icons. This is an icon like this you could hold in your hand. You would get an icon like that for your name saint. That is, if your name is Demetrius, you're named after Saint Demetrius, etc. So you might have an icon of that saint. And then I want to talk about the composition of the icons. I realize you all can't see everything I'm going to say, but I urge you to come up, and maybe my comments will stimulate you to come up and look closely at them after we finish. I love the penguin icon very much. It's a highly successful composition because the penguin and the chick, if that's the right word, are mirroring the arched inner frame of the icon. All of the icons, I think that's correct, have this arched frame. Some icons, the organism inside extends beyond the limits of the arched frame, as in the kelp. And a few of them, I think the scarlet honeycreeper is contained. The Sumatran orangutan is beautifully composed and framed. The ladybug, spectacular here. There's a difference in the approach to the organism, whereas in some cases the frame encloses and makes a special world for the organism, such as the ladybug. And then, in perhaps the most dramatic example, the sea turtle here. Both sides of the sea turtle are projecting beyond the inner frame, and the sea turtle is coming out at you. It's coming from the sea out toward our environment. And one final notion about composition. The frog, it's a great frog. You got to come look at the frog. I'm not a scientist. I have no idea how fidelity to frogs, but this is a great frog. And it would have a very long life and TV programs and films and things like this. Is a great frog. What's interesting in terms of icons is that the kelp, perhaps, or the seaweed or something that's off to one side here is serving almost like a curtain in a Baroque painting where you would have curtains on either side and you would see the saint inside. So there's a definite homage to an earlier form of paintings. I just now saw some of the great cylindrical compositions that Angela has made. Remember, she began with the St. Michael icon and then showed us other ones. And this too is a beautiful cylindrical composition, a circle within the arched frame, and then this highly graphic seahorse hippocampus here is framed for us. And then finally, the pangolin, I don't know if that's the way to say it, is also beautifully contained within the frame. So that's an art historian responding to the images. Very successful, very sophisticated compositions on a miniature scale. These are personal images for, if they were icons, for the believer. Now I want to talk about the panels as icons. The word icon has an enormous range of meanings now. It refers to these something, widgets on computers that you click and it takes you to another world. Medieval icons were like that. You didn't necessarily click on it, but you may well have touched it or kissed it or bowed down before it, and you were taken to another world. Just as fast, or perhaps even faster, than if you were using an Apple or PC computer. The paintings of these various organisms is also serving to take us to another world, to isolate the images, to privilege them, and the organisms, and to ennoble them, which I think is particularly important for these threatened species heading toward, hopefully not toward extinction, but I hope they'll be saved. Icons, in some discussions of them in the Middle Ages, are called windows to heaven or gates to heaven. In other words, you access the icon by believing in it and the saint that's represented, and you're in the physical presence of it, you touch it, you kiss it, and then you have an access to the holy person. Icons, therefore, are means of prayer. They're similar to the vocative, which is used in prayers, Our Holy Father, etc., things like that. That English doesn't have a vocative case, but in declined languages, when you address God in a different case. That is, you're speaking to God. I admire these paintings greatly, but as religious icons, they don't serve as gates to heaven. The turtle is coming out of the icon toward us, whereas the icon itself, the saint and the icon, is there in some ways in a heavenly space and not necessarily in ours in the same way. But as an art historian, I love this contradiction in a way between how an icon works and how these paintings work and how they ennoble and sacralize these organisms. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks for having me. I do research just down the road at the corner of Sachem and Prospect is my office, and I've always been, every day I cycle past this building, and it's just wonderful to be here, and it's one of the great things about Yale to get connected in this way across disciplines. I feel immensely touched by these pieces of art, by these icons on 3 or 4 levels. And one thing you obviously didn't mention in the introduction is actually how I grew up in a very Catholic corner of Bavaria as an altar boy, and one way in which I'm touched by these images, and in addition to them being objectively beautiful, that's the first way. The second way for me is how I had an image of my Saint Walter drawn for me by my mom's friend when I was a little boy, and it hung there in our kitchen and still hangs there at home, and there are so many resemblances to this. So it's sort of, I grew up in sort of Baroque and Gothic churches with the use of gold and some other of these aspects that I'm not going to speak more to because I'm not an art historian. But I just feel personally touched in this additional way, which is just fascinating. And then there are these two other ways, right, where I'm touched by this for representing the magnificent diversity of life that we study in my group, my colleagues study day by day. And then fourth, I feel touched in a sort of a sadder way by these images because I know those species, and they also have this other meaning for me of threat to our planet, threat to our livelihood, to our cultures, to species. And that's what I want to talk a little more about, how I feel we have this deep, and we got chatting about this a bit earlier on, right? What drives me in my research is obviously I'm excited about doing science and doing good science, but what drives us in the particular questions that we try to tackle is how there's nothing, in my eyes, potentially more problematic, more unethical than leaving species behind, not being mindful of the amazing, some of us might call it creation, right? Others might just call it the diversity of life, the species around us, that species are like we are a species, right? And that aspect. And I'll say a little more about this. So biodiversity is declining rapidly, and some of our own research has shown how land use change has been already driving dozens and hundreds of species to extinction, how just in the last 20 years, actually, many species of cloud forest animals, of lowland tropical forest animals, of reef inhabiting animals have been committed to extinction. There might still be around a few of them, but essentially our models are predicting they're on the way out. And you know some of those stories from the media, and some of those thankfully make it into the public eye now. And I just can tell you from our own work, we're seeing that. What's actually fascinating about this collection, and I really respect deeply how you brought in what you said and what you write about these species very correctly, not just what the species are, but also how they're all representing different types of threats. And we have a diversity of species here, but we also have a diversity of threats represented. So land use change, look at this one, our satellite imagery shows how this one is using on a daily basis still critical habitat in Sumatra. This honey creeper is the worst already behind it itself, of course, but immense loss of population thanks to land use change in Hawaii. Frogs are tropical frogs are a classical case of land use change. And it's not like, well, the Colombians are doing this, right? It's because it's our demand for this or that good that we then import up here that's very directly connected to these habitat losses. And we are able to show the original cause very well now with remote sensing, 10-meter resolution, very detailed habitat maps that we're able to check on a weekly basis what's been happening to the habitat of the species. But then our colleagues are, thanks to that insight, able to link it to consumption, to sourcing of products, palm oil and things like that, just one example. Right? The pangolin is another one of habitat loss. But then we have pollution. Here, manatees was mentioned several times. I mean, you essentially ticked off all the key drivers of biodiversity loss today, and they're represented those image rates. it's quite captivating to me actually to then have that all represented in this very visual and way that connects to specific species. Climate change is now coming in as another key factor, and we should chat more about that actually. What could be additional examples here? Disease in the case of frogs, another one. Trade, I did already mention maybe. So a suite of factors causing the collapse of biodiversity and thus ecosystems, because they're defined by the species in a particular setting. And then, yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of activities that try to steer against that. And I think with science, we can make one important contribution to point the finger on some of this loss and make predictions. I've also been involved in science policy processes. There was a big UN meeting up in Montreal, and out of it came the Montreal Kunming Accord, or framework for biodiversity, where countries across the world, parties to the Convention on Global Biodiversity, made a commitment to decreasing extinction risk, adding more protected areas, etc. Two key countries that are not part of the convention, by the way, are the Vatican and the United States, the only countries that are not party to the Convention on Biological Diversity. And we may forgive the Vatican in that there isn't that much biodiversity there, but still, the United States is certainly a key culprit here. They're trying to engage in other ways, I should say, but and it's ultimately to do with Senate majority rules around this sort of joining of conventions. And I want to mention there one thing, and that is there's some good news that came out of that. And we scientists also shouldn't be just the ones sort of saying, giving these doomsday news all the time. There are some good news. I think there's some good news in science and technology that we're now able to better monitor and document and point the finger on particular cases, identify the causes. But then also on this science policy interface, there is now a commitment to doing more, at least on paper. One such commitment is to add protected areas or other management actions that involve people and include people in the right way. 30 by 30, some of you might have heard, right? 30% protected areas in land and sea by 2030. And then some of us think of it as well as a path to 50. There is also a real recognition we need more than that, right? Some people argue, well, I would support that half for nature, half for people. It doesn't mean like we need to put up fences, right? And some of that nature might be just over there, right? And make us happy as we look at it and be able to use it, but we need to include nature in our thinking. And one of the really fascinating projects that I've been able to engage in as a scientist is the Half-Earth project. It's coming out of the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation. And I encourage you all to have a look at the Half-Earth map, where we try to kind of put on the map, on a global map, a 3D map, information about what are potentially high priority areas to think about for additional conservation action. This goes back to Ed Wilson's, E.O. Wilson's work. Some of you might know his work on biophilia or his sociobiology work. He wrote a very important book called Half-Earth, where he made that case. So please have a look at the Half-Earth project. And our artist has been engaging closely also with E.O. Wilson and the foundation and been supporting it through her artwork. And then brings me to my final point, how, yes, in some of these policy fora and other conversations that bring in industry, there's an attempt to attach economic value to biodiversity and talk about ecosystem services and valuing the erosion control, or some of you might have heard of nature-based solutions to climate change, right? Forests for carbon sequestration, and all of that is right and good and important. I would hold firm that there's nothing as powerful in touching us as humans, individually, as a species. Being able to connect with an image, being able to connect with a story that's behind the species. Seeing a species, of course, right, yourself, getting touched. Maybe some of you have seen some apes, maybe just a zoo, right? But there is just, you'll never forget that when you saw your first ape. Or when you were scuba diving, you saw your first, or just snorkeling and you saw a turtle. Might happen in the Caribbean quite easily. Right? It's just like, oh. And it's that that touches us, and I think that deeply, some of us may call it religiously or ethically, connects us to biodiversity in our think, obligation to want to leave no species behind. And it's so special to be here today and look at these images, because that's exactly how one other really amazing way in which we can get touched about biodiversity and ultimately for biodiversity. Thank you.
Test one, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've said many thanks. and now my gratitude is to the species, really. So I want to begin by saying on Easter Sunday afternoon in our backyard, John called me, "Come to the window." And there was a huge black bear that's been floating through our neighborhood, and more than floating, because he took quite a bite out of the bird feeder. And today, regrettably, because we understand he's been around the neighborhood and so on, it was magnificent to see him, though, that close and so on. But regrettably, we took our bird feeder down. And, you know, it was quite a moment sitting there at the dining room table and watching these birds try to find the feeder, which they do, you know, right? And even in the spring and all through up to, they come early and they stay all winter. But watching them fly to where they had been every day, I felt such a loss. And it really reminded me of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and the loss of birds and that image of Silent Spring, which sometimes I feel even in our neighborhood in Woodbridge, because there's a lot of pesticides being used. And people don't even know who Rachel Carson is. People don't understand. She was the founder, in many ways, of the environmental movement. And we have her papers here at the Beinecke Library. And we would take almost every semester our students to the Beinecke Library. And her papers would be laid out, her drawings, her sketches, and so on. The first edition of Silent Spring in the New Yorker, then the book, and then a pile of papers like this from the chemical industry. And that's what we're still up against. And we need to pay attention to why this is such an important issue. And it is an issue that every human, as was just said by Walter, can be involved in. There is such a tremendous sense. Those students who came out of the Beinecke had awe and wonder and reverence. Some of them would write it up like, I felt I was in a cathedral of nature, watching the courage of this woman, a scientist and a poetic writer. And that's another thing that we're trying to do, put science together with the humanities to reach an even broader audience. Now, I tell these stories to evoke a response to these icons, as my colleagues have done so beautifully as well. Because what they do, as Angela has said, is bring to us a sense of presence and resonance. Presence and resonance. This is hugely important because it changes something in us, as Walter said. Now, we have great nature photography. We have films, Attenborough, BBC, and others. We've got writing. Painting does this too, clearly. But the added value of these icons, as Rob said at the end of his talk, is the sense of the sacred. The sense of the sacred, a word we rarely use in academia, I must say, except up here at the Divinity School. But that is the added value of these icons, because there's an integration with Rachel Carson's gift, her book, A Sense of Wonder, that she wrote for her nephew. But here we have a sense of the sacred that evokes something even deeper from us and for us. So this is a remarkable contribution to our biodiversity crisis, this sense of the sacred, because fundamentally, as we were talking, Walter, scientists and religious people are inspired by wonder, by awe. I mean, look at the website that he has put together. It's just extraordinary. So we need, though, don't we, a new language of the sacred, recognizing Earth, as Thomas Berry would say, as a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. There's subjectivity here. There's interiority here. There's presence here. So bringing that sense of presence and resonance to empathy, in our times, it is a window into new or renewed human-Earth relations. So the sacred is not static or abstract or removed from the world, but rather in our times it is a window into new and renewed human-Earth relations. It puts us in contact with mystery, what is beyond full explanation, even as close as the scientists can get to it. We don't know how migrations fully happen, and so on and so forth, but they bring us to the edge of mystery and wonder. And this is experienced widely in the human community. Namely, mystery is a sense of relationality and interdependence. And that's a thrilling thing to experience, especially after COVID, with such isolation and so on. So, this world is a locus for encountering the sacred, for being in the presence of such complexity that words sometimes are insufficient. Now, I'm going to make just 3 comments about some positive things that are happening for biodiversity protection and so on. And I'm going to end up with what I think is one of the richest areas, and that is differentiated sentience in all life forms. Now, let's talk about a broader ethics that's needed, which is why Ryan Darr is here and doing such amazing work, broader ethics beyond the human. Secondly, a movement that embraces the rights of nature. And thirdly, the aspirational legal documents that are in place to guide and sustain this movement, including the Earth Charter, which I was involved in and came out in 2000. That's almost 25 years. So from principles to practicality, from ideas to action, and these documents can help us do that. So expanding ethics. Our ethics are totally human-centered, and we know they're insufficient for sure. But Thomas Berry said years ago, we have an ethics for homicide and suicide, but not for biocide and ecocide. Now, a movement that's been growing for probably at least 20 years had a huge jump in acceptance at the end of March, less than 2 weeks ago. The EU, the European Union, adopted the sense that ecocide should be part of law in the EU. This is fantastic. Did it reach our newspapers? No. But that's really something to note. We need these hopeful signs, and we need the principles to guide the action. Now, Secondly, and by the way, this is going towards the International Criminal Court to say that ecocide is as bad as genocide and war crimes and so on. So it's a very influential movement. Secondly, this rights of nature movement. I'm sure you've heard of the rights of the river in New Zealand, the rights even here of the Lake Erie and so on, the Colorado River, et cetera. This rights of nature, which again, Thomas Berry said we need a new earth jurisprudence. We never would have imagined in our lifetime that these cases are actually going forward. And now they include personhood of species, which is astonishing. Growing slowly but surely. Then thirdly, the legal and ethical documents that are guiding this and have been done by many people around the world. I was part of, for almost 10 years, the Earth Charter, which there's a few copies out there, that came out of the Rio Conference in '92. And I'll just give you one sentence from the preface, which brings together evolution and biodiversity. And it says, we're part of a vast, evolving universe. Earth, our home, is alive with a myriad community of life. That was done by a scientist and spiritual leader in a small group writing that document. That's 2000. 2010, we have the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth that came out of a conference in Cochabamba, in Bolivia, 35,000 largely indigenous peoples writing this. This was brought to the floor of the UN when Venezuela was president, and it was endorsed, passed. These are not legally binding documents, but they're aspirational documents, which are exceedingly important. Let me jump to the right to a healthy environment, which 20 countries have acknowledged this as important, and the UN just adopted, that was what I was referring to, 2 weeks ago, the right to a healthy environment. Astonishing. So let me conclude with this sense of all these documents, the rights of nature, a broadened ethics. Here's what I think is actually tremendously exciting, because it involves everyone. And that is a growing sense that sentience is not just limited to humans, but there's differentiated sentience, as we see in these icons all around us. I wish I could give you lots of examples of it, but let me just say, this ranges from plants, trees, forests, birds, salmons, turtles, caribou, etc. We just had a plant conference here at Yale this past weekend. One of the leading plant scientists, Schmidt, was talking about the sentience of plants, okay? We did a conference here on trees, old growth forests. 9,000 people signed up to listen to Robin Kimmerer and others talk about the communication of trees and so on. The migrations and their patterns, extraordinary. We don't even know how they do it. Red-knot sandpipers coming from Tierra del Fuego all the way up to James Bay have their fledglings. Their fledglings go back by themselves, stopping in the Chesapeake Bay for the horseshoe crab eggs. So finally then, the fact that we are part of a living Earth community is certainly a basis for awe and action. The Hall of Biodiversity at the Natural History Museum began as we finished our Harvard conferences, and it began because the curators there were so disturbed when they learned that 6 of the finalists for an ornithology position watched their birds go extinct while they were studying. There's a book called Watching at the Edge of Extinction. So they set up the Hall of Biodiversity. It has a plaque on the floor that says, we are in the midst of a 6th extinction, but we have a choice. And there's exhibitions of destruction and restoration there. So I want to conclude with a poem that John Grimm, my husband, wrote this morning, which I think comes back to the significance of the arts and environmental humanities at Yale. I have to hold up. And the poem is titled, Where We Are Before Rain. Where we are before rain, waiting for water, patiently as water moves with being. May I be a bird, winged, swooping to rest, feed, sing, each being in relationship, flies, flows, crawls towards what matters. We often say, entanglement now, what did our ancestors call that? Harmony, flourishing, sacred place of my shedding. Thank you all.
Thank you so much to our panelists. So I'm going to invite Angela to come back up. We will take about 10 minutes I'm going to first invite Angela to respond if she'd like in any way to the panelists, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you. Well, I'm just beyond honored to hear all of you in your unique expressions and your areas of expertise. I would really like to invite the audience to ask questions, and if you have any questions for me, I look forward to it. So, yeah.
Okay, so let's open it up for questions. Would anybody like to ask? And again, please speak into the microphone so people on the live stream could hear. I think we have 3 microphones in the front, and we'll just have to pass around because we'll need this one for audience.
So thank you all so much for that wonderful presentation and for the beautiful icons. I just want to disagree with something that you said, Professor. You've taught, and forgive me if I don't get your exact expression correctly, but you said about icons being sacred, and I think you used the term being a gateway to heaven. And you said, but these icons don't present to you a gateway to heaven. I look at it just the opposite. I see these as a gateway to heaven. And the difference being, I think, the heaven that I see these icons are not the heaven out there someplace that we learn about in Christianity and other religions. 60 years ago, Lynn White told us we need to reimagine our theology. I see these icons as inviting us to the heaven that Thomas Berry talked about, that Mary Evelyn just did a wonderful job, as she always does, talking about and explaining to us how we can get to that heaven. So I see that exactly as a gateway to heaven.
Thank you. You're absolutely correct. On the other hand, I won't back down from what I said. I can pray to an icon of St. Basil, as he wrote, praying to that icon, that image of Basil, your prayers are transferred to Basil in heaven. I can't pray to the frog. I'm sorry. That's my religion. I can understand how the images sacralize nature, but it doesn't have the same religious function for me. So that's where I am. Thank you.
Thank you, and let me start with gratitude. Thank you so much to all of you. As a science communicator and as a Zoroastrian, I am so touched. And my question for you is, in Zoroastrianism, we have the concept of Asha, which is science, what fits, what I witnessed today is basically Asha being created among us, right? Bringing science, beauty into it. Are there other concepts in other faiths, such as that you know of, that are similar to Asha?
Well, thank you for that question. And delighted to have Zoroastrian on our website of Forum on Religion and Ecology. And certainly this project of over 25 years is trying to identify exactly that. What is a sense of this broadened ethics, a sense of the holy, a sense of commitment to and conservation of the natural world? And there's lots of projects listed and engaged projects of communities doing restoration ecology, of water areas, of fisheries, of forests, and so on. So this is, I would suggest, while I respect what you have said, Rob, I do think this is part of a sense of a broadened ethics and spiritual response. And certainly, I would say the next generation is getting this, but also people listening to these webinars are very, very engaged. And conservation will benefit, I think, from these sensibilities of the world's religions, which is why we're trying to evoke them. I see your daughter also wanted to ask a question, did you?
I have an unrelated question, but you had mentioned earlier that the small size of the icons usually relates to a kind of personal iconography, and I was wondering if perhaps you think it could have implications for our personal duty to preserve biodiversity.
Can you say the last part? I didn't quite get it.
Oh, I was wondering if you thought the small size of the icons and the kind of connections to personal iconography could be related to our kind of personal duty to preserve biodiversity and these types.
I think that's a great idea. As I said, I was surprised at how small they were. In the Middle Ages, as I said, an icon like that you would have in your bedroom or in your very personal space, something like that. And the other thing about the scale is that it makes us look very closely at the organism. And that creates more of the visual power and significance or even sentience of that was just discussed here. This is something of a new concept to me. I'm trying on this word and this idea. Yeah, go ahead. You want to use this one?
So these are certainly not scientific observations that I'm going to scientific observations, but just to say, like, to add 2 points, they're exactly the size as that sacred Walter picture is that's hanging at my home kitchen at home. And I do feel there is something about it. You know, imagine like this was the size of 2 by 4 meters, sort of staring down at you. That's not. That is kind of like a certain awe that comes from that, but it doesn't establish that personal, that connection, right? That you get from something of this size that you have to get close to, and you feel like you can hold, right? As you were saying, right? You can actually hold this, and I can't remember who said it, but you can hold it in your hands and connect with it. The second point I would like to make, what I really loved, actually I most loved the slide that you showed at the end where you showed your whole collection thus far. And I love that here as well. We actually get an appreciation of the diversity of life, right? It's not just like one species staring at us, which would be a huge image would do that, but we're able to appreciate the immense diversity of life and of threats to life all together here on one wall, and we're able to get closer and then connect with those. And I think someday seeing your whole collection together in one place and hopefully for that collection to grow, it's just something immensely powerful. So as a biodiversity scientist, I feel touched in that way of seeing those together in that way.
I wanted to thank you so much for these beautiful paintings. And just to echo something that Evelyn Tucker said before, that the awe and the beauty calls us to action. And there's an urgency, I feel, in seeing them that makes us feel a sense to respond. And I feel that very strongly. So I thank you for bringing this attention. I have a comment and then a question. And the comment is really that we're here at Yale University, and we have things that we could do here. Many of us here are part of the Yale community. There's things that we are doing here to protect, the biodiversity, including, I'll just say birds, because I work on birds. But there's more that we can do, of course. We have issues around climate. We have our de-investment that we need to do. And there's all sorts of things that we could do to support these lives. I felt that very strongly when we looked at the turtle and we saw the plastics. And we can think about our use of plastics here. So that was my one comment, is that as Yale, we have an obligation and we have things that we can do. So I invite everyone to do their part. My question is for you as an artist and someone who obviously feels a close connection, that observation that you bring, that close observation, is how do you work with that, to lean into this place of fragility and to show that tenderness? And how does that affect you as an artist to bring close observation to species that they're facing us, but really they're going away in your icons? So I just wonder how that affects you as an artist.
Okay. Hello? Can you hear me? So thank you for that question. The process is really something that affects me very deeply. So you saw how they develop on the icon board. There's a growing sense of intimacy, like they evolve on the board, the image evolves on the board, so that when finally at the end, when the image is complete, there's a deep connection and admiration, I would say. I mean, when I work in all these different species, I start to see the connections between a feather and how it looks like a scale, and how the eye of a salamander looks like the eye of the seahorse. And it works a kind of mystique. And I start to see that the whole living world is just one dynamic pattern. And the ultimate impression is beauty and harmony. And so my ultimate objective is to share those feelings with other people and motivate them. And what I heard from the students yesterday is that the juxtaposition between the sacred image, which I'm trying to convey, and then what's happening to them, the desecration, it creates a kind of what I call creative tension. And tension seeks resolution. And so what I want to evoke is action in favor of saving these creatures. So I don't consider any of them necessarily bound for extinction. I'm pointing out that if we use our human agency, that we can have an impact. And so it's an appeal. And thank you. Thank you for your question.
I know we have quite a few more questions. We're going to have to wrap it up here. But the event goes till 7, so please feel free to come up and ask your question to Angela or to the panelists afterwards. So I want to just conclude by thanking Angela once again and thanking our panel for all of their contributions. Thank you all for coming. It was wonderful to have you here.